Welcome to Views from the Top, the podcast from Arma Partners. I'm Andrew Wheatley, a partner at Arma, and I lead our cloud and data services team. And with me today, I have Pontus Noren. Pontus, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming. Pontus, you've had a really interesting career to date, from founding Cloudreach, the sale to Blackstone, and really being, I think, one of the pioneers of that cloud native wave, that initial wave of cloud adoption, and now setting up Ensemble AI, leading the next wave, if you like, of services with software as your model for a range of industrial use cases. So really keen to get into both those topics today. So if it makes sense, let's start with maybe the Cloudreach story and the inspiration for starting Cloudreach and how that sort of played out.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, again for having me this morning. By the time we started Cloudreach in 2009, I'd been working for 14 years in some large corporates, including Cisco, Ericsson, and Nokia.
Yeah.
And I felt that the world of IT was almost grinding to a halt through needless upgrades and updates and very limited value add, let's say, within IT. It was very much a cost center back in the late 2000s. And I read a book called The Big Switch, which was about how electricity was generated in the late 1800s through direct current sitting next to your factory. And then when alternate current came along, you can have power generation much further away from the actual factory. And they compared that with data centers, basically, and that today no one ever think of building a power plant next to a building. You buy your power, and that the compute power and associated services will become on demand one day and based on metered use as opposed to a fixed price. And that really was a starting point for me, thinking, surely there's a different way of doing IT. And I guess was a very big part of the inspiration of founding Cloudreach in early 2009.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. So back to those industrial cases. And I guess today it's super relevant, right? With new technology coming on and driving a new wave of activity. So lots of parallels to, I guess, this new AI wave, right?
Yeah, I guess you can see some of that. I mean, that was more around compute becoming utility from being something you had to have in-house.
Yep.
And I think, I wrote my first line of code in the mid-'80s as a teenager in Sweden. And if you compare then to today, there's been a lot of superlatives used around AI and machine learning, although it's been around for decades. We actually do a short lecture ourselves at Ensemble AI about the evolution of AI. It's come a long way over many, many decades. Clearly, it's come to the forefront over the last 5 years because it became more accessible and priced in a different way as well, and usable, I guess, through major cloud platforms. That it wasn't in the same way a few years ago.
Lots of parallels,
yeah, and they also brought it to people's attention what the art of the possible is.
Agreed.
But anything within the big sphere of AI, being generative AI to machine learning to more simple applications, are now, I think, being considered in a way they weren't only 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah, perfect. Fantastic. Well, we'll get into Ensemble in a moment, but maybe we'll talk a little about the Cloudreach origin story. And you sort of said the inspiration, which is super interesting. What was sort of the key to success for that business? What was the special sauce, if you like?
I think, well, first of all, the first thing we did was we became a partner with Google around Google Apps and helping enterprises move off an on-premise email platform into Google. That was the first kind of 6-7 months of our existence.
Okay.
We then thought that there's a lot more to the world of IT than email and collaboration. And when looking around in the ecosystem, we came across a retailer from Seattle who created something quite interesting called Amazon Web Services. At the time, they had 1 employee in the UK, so we can't be accused of jumping on bandwagons, let's say, when we decided to partner with Amazon in September 2009. But the real inspiration was the fact that most enterprises, medium and large or very large enterprises, have a huge investments made in applications and business logic and database infrastructure, etc. So moving that to a SaaS platform was probably unrealistic, but moving those kind of applications to a cloud platform like Amazon Web Services was very achievable. And that's really what we started out to do. And I think there was we had a very good partnership with Google over a number of years, but there was the AWS partnership that really I guess was a springboard or something bigger when it came to Cloudreach.
And that was because of the lead generated, or just the buzz around that coming from the
No,
US?
it's just the size and scale
that...
of the issue, right?
Yeah, okay.
Let's be honest, all enterprises, they use email, but it's not. So it's business critical in one way, but it's equally not business critical or differentiating versus another enterprise.
Yeah.
So it's kind of path of least resistance to get a good email and collaboration system. Although I think there are some major differences between 365 and Google Workspace today.
Yeah.
But if you think about the scale of the opportunity and challenge of running a data center, obviously that's far outweighs the email and collaboration. So we were able to tackle much bigger challenges with Cloudreach for enterprises. They wanted to transform their way they do enterprise IT.
And I always remember your slogan, not if, but when.
No but, just not if, when. So it was even
not if, when.
Sharper.
Yeah, that was mine. It'd be interesting in your take on the kind of current status of the cloud market, because that was all around, adoption is going to happen. It's just a matter of time. We're now, I guess, a decade on from Blackstone's investment in the business, etc., and now Cloudreach owned by Atos, and the whole space has moved on a lot. Hyperscalers are clearly pushing hard on AI. But interesting, just your views on, is the adoption in line with what you thought it was going to be, and how's that played out?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. So there's a couple of aspects to that question. So first of all, one pivotal moment was we worked with Kempinski Hotel Group in Switzerland. Astonishing. I think it's one of the first, maybe the first globally, migration of a data center from on-premise to AWS in 2012.
Right?
This goes way back. And relatively, I don't think they mind me saying this, conservative Swiss German hotel group. So the fact they were the first was quite an interesting point in itself, and there's a wider story to tell around that. But even when that happened in 2012, whilst it felt inevitable, it was quite clear quickly that it's going to take some time for these things to really filter through, which it did.
Yeah.
And I'd say that by 2015, 2016, we were working quite deeply into BP and Aviva and some other of the larger kind of UK names, although we had offices in the US and across Europe as well. And you could tell that the direction of travel was one way only. But, it comes down to, I say to people, if you're a CIO or CTO of a company, when a C-level person, you probably have 3-4 priorities that you can kind of deal with in a major way at any point given time. So unless you get onto that top 3 list, doesn't mean other things don't happen. But if a real transformation, there's only so much an IT organization can deal with.
Yeah.
So of course, even if a migration to a cloud platform would be that AWS or Azure or Google Cloud makes eminent sense. Can the organization deal with it? Because also you have things like the skills were not aligned because you're going from a physical infrastructure to programmable infrastructure. There was lots of questions around legal and data sovereignty and so on. Yeah. So it took a number of years for people to just kind of get over some of those, what you might say is a basic hurdle for a startup, is a massive hurdle for a big enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's nothing to do with the technology or the suitability, but it's more like how can we get that over the line? And as a consequence, these things take time, years, to really find their way deep into an enterprise.
Yeah.
And even if you go relatively deep, the existing, call it legacy, or if you want to pick a better word, basically, but things you might want to change one day, it takes time, and you have to write off the economic value and all that. So I think a lot of people who are in technology, we get a bit speed blind with everything that we see. We think it's funky and new and should be adopted. But then there's the reality of an enterprise, what they can actually do. And there's lots of non-technical reasons why things will take a bit of time.
Yeah, makes sense. And you see the hyperscalers growth rates at the moment. I mean, they slowed down a little bit. AWS growth down to 12% 2 years ago or something. But now it's ramping up to get 20, 30 again. And Google and Azure also really pushing hard with growth rates of 40% plus in some
I haven't seen the latest number, but if you think about the percentage of global infrastructure is currently running on cloud, it's probably less than 50%, maybe less than 30%.
Agree, yeah.
So therefore, despite all these growth rates, it's just my point around things take time.
Yes,
right?
Agreed.
And that's just the reality.
Brilliant. And so Cloudreach was obviously a great success, a real pioneer of that age, if you like, of cloud adoption. And then obviously you led the sale to Blackstone, and ultimately the business was acquired by Atos. Just be interested your kind of your sense of learnings, both from the build phase, but also from the PE ownership, the sort of the scale up phase. And look, nothing's ever perfect, right? So just interested to get kind of your views across it.
Yeah. I think one of the things we did very well at the very beginning, and this is also close to my heart in general as a philosophy, is that quite often people have this, we've always done it this way type attitude, and therefore let's keep doing it this way.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that could be a good or a bad way. So even if you've been doing it for years or decades, it might still be a bad way of doing it. But even if it's a good way, there's a real question like, is this the right way? Because especially in technology, as things change relatively rapidly, I think you always have to pause and think, is this the right way? So when it came to the people that we employed, both the type of people and their background education, I think was a huge differentiator in the early days.
Yeah.
So it was about finding the right people with the right attitude and aptitude, but also a broader skill set. So it was quite common at the time that you were very specialized in a database technology or even, authentication active director and so on. We had people with broad range skills, had a bit of programming, a bit of infrastructure, a bit of database, a bit of networking, and we molded them into kind of unique AWS beasts. And today, a lot of these people are no longer part of the Atos setup, but are working for AWS and Google and other big cloud infrastructure providers and have done it super well. But they got their grounding with us, basically. So I think one of the learnings was around really forcing yourself to think different and come up with a new idea, which I'm going to come back to the AI side of things in a moment, but every time there's this transition, you have to kind of almost rethink and go back to first principles around what you need as a business.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Now you must be proud of that, the legacy of the business. It grew super well. It was a pioneer at the time, but also the people that have come out of it. Think business like CTS that we've been involved with, like Telenor would be another example. Even things like Elisa. There's a whole bunch of different companies that have come out of that, and some great people actually. So it must be that's quite a cool legacy to have as part of it as well, I would say.
Yeah, and even in the US, where Stephen Gardner, of course, has been a successful entrepreneur there, and he got his first years of schooling here in the UK.
Of course, I'd forgotten about Stephen.
We also exported some of the talent to other markets. But look, we had a fantastic time. We're super lucky to find and attract and retain some very good people, both good human beings as well as very good engineers and leaders and others. And a lot of people have gone on to do some fantastic things kind of in their post-Cloudreach careers. And it is definitely one of the most satisfying things about building a business is to find and help and work together with people to further their personal ambitions and career. That's definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, perfect. I think we always focus a lot on the tech because that's the instigator or that's the piece which sets the wheels in motion. But you're right, it's the people often, right? That human capital point, particularly at the moment with new technologies coming around. So you need those new people with the right mindset to drive these things forward.
Yeah, I'll probably use a different term. We'll talk about that over a beer.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's move on to Ensemble AI. Super exciting. We've been chatting a little bit about this for a while, but it would be great just to understand kind of what the business does from your perspective. We should get into maybe some of the use cases the business is working on and the new acronym, software with a service, if I've got that right.
Yeah? There you go, back to first principle, inventing new stuff just to confuse people.
I love it.
So 2 years in the making, the first 6 to 9 months, we were kind of living life as a consultancy, really. We did a big project for a company in the US, a big pharmaceutical, where we built out essentially a new front-end skin, etc., and a big data kind of lake infrastructure supporting a migration to Amazon Connect, the CRM system from AWS. And we took away a lot of learnings from that, basically. Okay. And out of all those learnings and kind of synthesizing that information, if you wish, as well as talking to a ton of people across different customers and cloud providers, etc., I arrived at a point where we thought, there's definitely a market for services also in this industry, for sure. But I thought it was more interesting to actually go after vertical segments of software.
Yeah.
And see what we can do with that around AI, because AI is not infrastructure like cloud was back in the day. So it's not about taking an old application and moving it or maybe refactoring it, et cetera, to run on the cloud. But it can and probably will kind of fundamentally impact and change how enterprises run their day-to-day business. You know, a lot of the time when we did a cloud migration with Cloudreach, the company who we worked with, and we moved the entire data center with, you know, dozens or hundreds of applications. In some cases, people came to us afterwards and said, "Have we done this project yet?" It was like, "Yeah, you've been live for 3 months," because they absolutely noticed nothing.
Yeah.
And that's how it should have been, right?
Yeah.
Whereas AI, I think, is very different. You know, if you don't notice, you say that you should and shouldn't, but I'd say it has more of a fundamental impact on the way you can operate a business today.
Yeah, that shift from back office infrastructure, which just needs to run, to a new enabler of different processes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So just talk through some of the use cases from Ensemble AI, just to maybe bring it to life for people.
Yeah, so we spend quite a lot of time with, say, industry experts from both insurance, retail, public sector to a degree, etc., but also a few people who are with a very deep expertise in manufacturing. So these are engineers with spanners as opposed to with keyboards. So real engineers, I would call them.
Real engineers, I like that.
And over time, we've now built up a software platform, essentially, that we are continuing to work on, and are working with a few organizations that focuses important supply chain management and important asset lifecycle management, where we think it's some incredible opportunities. And just to expand on asset lifecycle management, this is not financial assets. An asset in this case is a machine.
Yep.
It could be a packing machine in a food manufacturer. There could be a paint shop in a car manufacturer, etc.
Yep.
And as they buy all the machinery in, you go through a 4-step process. You acquire, you operate, you maintain, and you either renew or retire, basically. And in all those 4 phases, you have an enormous amount of information that humans try to synthesize and keep in their mind. You also have ERP systems that are essentially systems of record, but they're not system of reason. So even though they hold the data, although in a lot of cases the data is poor, they rely 100% on humans to do something with it.
Yeah.
So the first piece of software we're developing is really to target the acquire and the maintain stage of the 4-stage life cycle, and a bit around the renew element, basically.
Right.
And I didn't quite answer your question about the thing that said a software with a service.
Yeah.
So let's say we're working on a solution we call Flux Reliability, which sits on our Flux Foundry platform. And this is really targeting spare parts management.
Okay.
So anything from finding a spare, if you're an engineer on the shop floor, 2 a.m., your sausage roll machine is packed up, and you need to find the right spare. That's actually harder than you might think.
Okay.
And what we use with AI and some machine learning is to match the thing that broke with what you might have in your spare store.
Okay.
It's either an identical or slightly less similar, called equivalent, or even less similar, called an alternative.
I see.
Today, for humans to make the judgment, it's actually can require hours of work,
Okay.
and we can do that in milliseconds to say this spare would work in this situation. But then the other thing is most people carry between, depending on industry, 50-60% more spare than they require.
Right.
For a whole variety of reasons.
Yeah.
So the other part of the platform is to help people financially optimize their spares holding.
Got it.
And, some of our customers have millions and millions, some tens of millions of pounds worth of spares, even in the hundreds of millions of pounds.
Yeah.
So when you're talking that amount of money, if you can reduce spares holding by 10, 15, 20%,
Right.
you're targeting a very, very critical problem, let's say, that's to date unsolved in a lot of cases.
And do people actually know what spares they got, or is that part of the AI piece as well to capture the data? You alluded to the data not being always great.
Yeah, so there's a saying which I'm learning from our engineers that most people have like one spare in the store, one in their toolbox is not recorded anywhere, and then one somewhere else. So you often duplicate stuff. So yeah, in a lot of cases, they're not quite well recorded either, and that's a loss of balance sheet value, basically.
Yeah.
But then to finally answer your question on with a service, why with a service? Well, because you build a solution like this, and we reckon 70 to 90% will be perfect fit for majority of manufacturers and oil and gas companies out there. But the last 10 to 20 to 30%, it might be a slightly different workflow, a different integration into an ERP system we've never heard of, etc. So it's always a bit of with a service on top to really make the software fit vertically integrated into that customer's environment.
Got it.
And the difference between an old what I call old horizontal software is come to my website, swipe a credit card and buy it, and I'll leave the problem with you to make it work for you.
Yeah.
So I think in the future, going forward now, companies like us, we need to both provide a very robust software platform that works very well out of the box, but help the customer then fit it into their environment properly,
really
including some changes to our own software, basically. So it'll be a somewhat tailored version of software.
A really interesting take on the kind of the verticalized software approach. And we've been talking well with clients around this kind of convergence of services and the convergence of services and software and coming together, whether it's more agentic or automated or outcome focused. It feels like a really interesting kind of example of that trend. Is that how you would see it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the term agentic, as you and I have discussed, Andrew, is somewhat abused and misused by a lot of people.
Let's get into that. Yeah, go on.
Because you mentioned the term agentic.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, what we are developing is an agentic platform.
Yeah.
Right? So if you compare it with a chatbot, be that Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, etc., they rely on a human input to generate an output. Then the human will take the output and go and do something.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what a chatbot does. And we use a lot of this technology day to day in Ensemble AI. So we find it hugely useful. But the difference for me with an agentic piece of software, like the Flux reliability for spare parts, is that this can react on an event. So the AI agent, which is not a thing, it's a whole platform, is waiting for an event to happen. Could it be someone takes a spare out, an asset breaks, and we get notification of that. We can then see the impact of spares you may no longer need, for example.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. It's kind of event driven. It can pick things up by itself without a human triggering the thought process, so to speak. It'll then go through, as I said, an old SAP Oracle ERP system, as an example, is a system of record, has zero reasoning in it. So you rely on humans to look at the information to do the reasoning. With an agentic software platform like Flux Reliability, we will do the reasoning to say, based on a number of constraints and rules, what spares do we need and do we not need? Or do we need to replenish this or that? What should be our max rate should be, and so on. So the system platform does all the reasoning and comes up with a decision.
Yes.
Now, of course, you can have a human in the loop here if you want, or you just let AI do its work and continue. And the third step in the process for it to be a truly agentic system is to act. So do you then, we can pass this information on to a robot, to a human. So I guess if it's truly agentic, the system should also do the action, but I think we're quite far away from that, because I think for a whole range of reasons, from limitations in companies' environments to the need for people to feel, at least for the time being, more in control. The act bit is the hardest, right? But by the time we get to passing this to some kind of a robotic system, be that a physical robot or a software platform, then you kind of close the loop on agentic, and this is when things go round and round and round. Now, that kind of somewhat utopic vision of agents and agentic software just running stuff, I think we are further away from that, we think. Not because the software can't do it, because we don't want it to do it yet.
And that's an adoption point, that it's hard to build it in, or that's because people just want to do it themselves, or it's just inertia?
No, it's not inertia. I think it's anything from regulatory reasons to internal compliance reasons to the fact that, we always talk about this inside Ensemble AI, this LLM is never better than the information we've given it. So therefore, the output that it creates is limited to what you've told it.
Yes.
So when something changes in the physical world, the LLM might not know it. So therefore, the decision, the reasoning decision made might be unsuitable to act on because of information that was not part of the setup.
Sure.
And this is the point, especially now, which is why I find the whole field of manufacturing and oil and gas so fascinating, because it's so connected literally to the physical world. And it will always be things that our software platform will not know of for a long time, right? I mean, it could be trucks driving around, it could be humans studying by a machine that's still involved, or it could be anything that if we are not aware of. Therefore, it's not that LLM is making a bad decision or a wrong decision, it just doesn't have all the facts.
Makes sense.
Which is another reason why you need to be pretty sure that the LLM has all the facts before you can really let it go and make more kind of deep run decisions. But people accept that. Right?
And on that, the sort of decision making and that process and the action, how much of that is done via code, defined code, not probabilities, but just determined code, versus what is driven by reasoning through probabilities and assessing, and how do those two things kind of come together in that solution?
Yeah, I put something on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago around the fact that humans are often very wrong, including driving cars, right? So if you take that as an example, so you have autonomous vehicles driving around, and somehow, because there's a computer system, as kind of very broadly put, people assume it's going to be 100% accurate. And therefore, there's zero tolerance for anything but 100% accuracy. Whilst when a human go behind the wheel, we crash into people, we fall asleep, some people unfortunately drink and drive, etc. Right? So there's a lot of issues on the road. And there are definite situations, maybe as a doctor looking at a scan for a patient to see if this patient has an illness and it's curing, the tolerance for error is much, much lower. In a lot of industrial settings, humans might be right 30% of the time. So we build a system that's right 90% of the time.
Yeah.
We have lifted that by a factor of 3. Because humans can never know everything that a machine can know. But it still makes it basically an error 1 time out of 10. But that's better than 7 times out of 10. Yeah. So therefore also, I think every time you design and work with organizations around this system, it's very important to explain the difference here between this being a deterministic mathematical output versus a probabilistic output that's basically depending on inputs and reasoning, where the system has used a probability scale to figure out what might be the right thing.
Yeah, and overall you're getting better outcomes through using a blend of both, plus the services piece that you mentioned before, right?
And unless you do, then don't buy the system, right? If your humans are that good, but in most cases, we're targeting processes where the volume of information could run into hundreds or even thousands of pages, like an operating manual, for example. Humans work on intuition and experience and all that stuff, right? But it can never hold all the information in their heads all the time. Whilst an LLM can. Right? That's the difference. So therefore, certain parts of the value chain, when you're doing things and deciding things, are better suited to the machine doing it. But then at the right moments, you probably still want a human to step in and just review that in case the machine had incomplete information when making the decision, right? And this is I guess the finesse of where we come in to also understand what those parameters are and how we design our systems accordingly. Yeah,
it's real art to building that, right? And that's more than
experience
just
art. Working very, very closely with our clients as well. Very closely.
And again, this is where perhaps more simple SaaS tools can never capture all of that stuff, and that's why you need the AI to help, but also the services piece to help. So it makes sense. And if we think a little bit more about that services world, I'm interested in your views on who are the winners and who are the losers in that kind of world. We constantly see waves of the new thing coming, something else becoming more legacy, etc. And the evolution of that and we're seeing a wave now of next generation AI native, if you like, services companies appearing who don't have, arguably past the cloud native stage, past the broader, older IT services piece. We see them making great progress around that. It's still very early in that world, but just interested in your view on, from a services perspective, what's going to define the winners versus the losers in this next generation of tech?
If you wanted to draw a parallel with the kind of cloud adoption era, we are probably in the equivalent of 2011 right now, maybe 2012.
Yeah, okay.
So we're probably moving faster, and it's probably a little bit bigger than maybe the kind of cloud world was back then. But it's in terms of the maturity of enterprises understanding this, actually wanting to adopt it. Don't believe everything you read would be my advice. So there's a lot of talk about it because enterprises don't want to be seen as behind, right? But they have a lot of, as I said earlier, stuff to worry about as an enterprise. So if I manufacture cars or I manufacture food or household goods, 98% of my time we've spent on figuring out how to run my business, and maybe 2% on innovation, maybe a bit more. But the point therefore is these things will take time. And of course, as a services business, these are the people you're selling to. So if the customer doesn't know what they want or need, it's going to be hard for you to sell that service. And I think interesting bit as well. I mean, we've gone down the route to actually building SaaS platform, but with the service. If you're a pure services company, you will be able to find plays around or deliver an adoption of chatbots, be that Claude, ChatGPT, etc., and roll out. So that's clearly one world. How do you maybe make it constrained to internal company information? How do you train people to use it, etc.? So there's a whole world of services around adoption of these essentially SaaS tools. And you do need to understand and know some about AI, but it's more about how those tools work as opposed to what the LLM is doing. Because you're not really diving deep into that platform necessarily. I think the other thing, if you're pure services, I said there's no kind of migration to AI, right? This is either an adoption of existing corporate applications that you have that's maybe in-house, or building brand new custom applications. And there will be a world for that as well. So there might be, because of the speed with which you can develop software today, that kind of blend between understanding a particular business and a vertical, how they operate, what are the processes within that company, and then building custom software that can help maybe bridge some of the gaps between existing legacy systems will be another world. But you really need a real blend of kind of AI and machine learning skills, software development, software delivery. Then there's a big question mark around who maintains that stuff. So over time, you're going to end up with potentially a bit of a spaghetti world of software sitting inside your enterprise. So if that's all bespoke and off the shelf, that's going to be the next wave then in terms of how does that get actually managed, I guess, and supported, which, if you build something that valuable, then the customer will want to pay for it. And, some enterprise will not have the capability in-house to look after it, frankly, and look after cloud platforms. There will be a market around that as well. But now we're more in the probably more pure software kind of managed services and support and bug fixing with some but less of a AI angle to it, I would say.
I think that managed service piece is really interesting because it feels like we're more in a professional services wave where people are building the tech, obviously using AI to do so and getting it adopted. I think a lot of people are looking for that managed service offering to add to that, which often drives a huge amount of enterprise value as part of the process. But we haven't seen lots of examples of people doing that well. And if you see that's direction of travel for the future of the space?
Well, unless someone is going to look after it, you're not going to go live with it, right? Someone needs to look after and manage it. And there has been a lot of trial, and may I say error, around AI kind of application development, we assume, because evidence suggests that there's been a lot of people experimenting with developing applications with or including AI inside it, but the actual go live and adoption is relatively low. So it feels like people are testing stuff out and then just parking it. And it's hard to say, is that because there is no managed service option, or what's the reason, or it just didn't deliver enough value, etc. So I think there's a lot of experimentation going on right now, I think, that is yet to turn into production use.
I guess there's a huge opportunity because if you build the software which is being used on a daily, monthly, hourly basis, whatever, that needs to be managed and in place. And things move, right? Models evolve, workflows evolve, the sophistication of the data gets better. So there's a huge opportunity, I think, there for people to knit all that together, and particularly for business critical systems, and to manage it, assure it, SLA it, etc., and drive the outcome. So it's a really interesting way it could evolve. But that point around sort of pricing, we've seen less people do sort of outcome-based pricing in the purest sense of it. We're seeing a much more sort of fixed price type kind of context how people are doing stuff. But I think it's coming. I
mean, we have actually strayed outside of the world of manufacturing, oil and gas, to done a bit of work with the regulator for architects. So there's a public case study today. Where we built a SWOS system, so it's slightly adopted to them, but we now have it and is RIP.
That's software with a service.
Yes.
I like that. I love it.
And we're in conversations with other regulators now who might want to use the same system. And the system is, in a sense, simple, but very, very effective. So most regulators use something called CPD, Continuous Professional Development. They require their members to undertake every year to stay on top of their profession, be that midwives or doctors or architects or accountants, etc. And depending on the regulator, you have to present the evidence back to the regulator. You've done it in order to renew your membership and retain your protected title. Right? So it is a protected title. You can't call yourself an architect unless you're registered with the Architects Registration Board.
Okay.
You can't call yourself a lawyer unless you're with SRA, etc.
Sure.
And what regulators do today, apart from ARB, is they will take a low single-digit percentage of CPD submissions, hire a team of people at the beginning of the year to manually read all these submissions to see if they comply with the standards set out by the regulator.
Oh, yeah.
We build an AI system that takes the information straight out of Dynamics, another system of record that has no reasoning.
Yes.
And we put it through our platform that, in accordance with the rules set out by ARB, so we essentially taught our platform to understand AI, the ARB's kind of regulatory framework, and then make a judgment call whether the CPD submission is either a pass, needs work, or essentially gets rejected.
Okay.
So we now have 100% coverage. So up from low single digit to every single submission by every single architect in the UK gets reviewed by our platform and gets passed back to ARB. So ARB knows now exactly what their level of compliance, where it is. Now, this is not a stick approach by ARB. They're trying to lift the standards of the industry. It's not about striking people off. It's more about helping people to actually do the CPD and the learning behind that's driving an improved regulatory framework for the UK as a whole. But this is another, and we are now running that over a 3-year period for ARB as a managed service, if you wish.
Yeah.
So this is a SWOS hosted platform run by us, integrated into their Dynamics platform.
Fantastic. And presumably there's potential for great cost savings there, and people's time to be redeployed into more important, better use cases. And as you say, lifting the standards.
Yeah, I think in this case, maybe slightly cheaper to use our platform.
Yeah.
But it drove compliance by a factor of 20-25, basically, up from 2-3% to 100%.
Oh, really?
So in terms of the work they're doing as a regulator,
yeah,
and when it comes to CPD specifically, they've improved their service massively, arguably, through the use of AI.
Interesting. And you just came back to something you touched on a moment ago, the sort of the vertical piece. That seems to be a hugely important part of the story. We've worked with a lot of horizontal companies with great tech. I think sometimes the more vertically aligned you can be, whether it's a number of verticals or a single one, just having that domain knowledge in this new world where it's less about the infrastructure and more about the front end just seems increasingly important. I'm guessing you subscribe to that view.
Yeah, I would go beyond saying it's increasingly important. I think it's imperative.
Right.
Because whilst not all horizontal software will die over time, I think some will, maybe a lot of them will, for that very reason. And although some of them have today incorporated AI into their platform, it really is just a way to use an LLM to search for information or whatever you do. It doesn't actually necessarily improve the workflow inside the platform. So it's really AI light at best, in my view, because it's not specifically there to solve a specific vertical problem. So, with most of these software platforms, I think for it to be really valuable, it has to be specific to what their organization is trying to do. What is that process where currently in our world, it's like if you have a ton of information then it requires human reasoning to make a decision that is right. That step in that process is right for AI adoption, but you need to understand that step. And you have to have the vertical understanding of why is that step important.
Interesting.
So if I can give you an example of that.
Please.
So, in discussions with various of our manufacturing base that we're talking to and working with, that part of the acquire stage is something called early management. And essentially what that is that if I'm going to go and spend millions, maybe tens of millions on either building a new factory or extending an existing line of production, etc., we're renewing it. Early management is a framework that people use in order to go back and look at what did we do in the past? What have we done in a different country? When we did that installation with those kind of equipment, then what was the failure rate? So what was the cost of operating that later on, etc.? And in most cases, they collect all this data.
Yep.
But it runs in the hundreds, if not thousands of pages, spreadsheets, drawings, you name it. And they don't have hundreds of thousands of people looking at this. They might have dozens or even less.
Yep.
To actually look at this. So even though the information exists, they should inform you how you do it better the next time, which is part of early management.
Okay.
It is super difficult to do well.
Right.
because of the volume of information required. So if you can build a platform, which is what we are working on designing, is to say you ingest all that information, these thousands of pages. You tell me what are your constraints, what are you trying to do, what are you trying to build, and we can synthesize all of that to provide a number of outputs and essentially inputs into the decision-making process of the humans that today you just can't do. You need to employ hundreds of people to read through all this documentation and then take months to write up what they found, but we can do this in minutes, basically. So that's another example of a very specific thing when it comes to deploying and buying factory equipment, basically, and how you can deal with that information in order to make the next installation and next build-out much more economically viable and easier to operate.
Got it.
So I think 80% of the cost of running that factory line is determined by the early management phase.
Interesting.
80%. So if you get that right, the cost of operation goes down dramatically.
Right. And you can't do that without that deep vertical knowledge, right? And
correct.
So that presumably, as you're building Ensemble today, must have sort of affect how you, the people you want in the business, how you go to market, how you set up the organization. I'd just be interested in your views on how you build a more vertically aligned business versus, say, Cloudreach is a more horizontally, arguably aligned business.
Yeah, in Cloudreach, we hired a few people who were former CIOs, and great people, by the way. In case they listen to this podcast, I think the challenge you have is if you come from that role. In the first 6 months, it's very efficient. After 12 months, you're gone a bit native, and kind of beyond a year, you're probably pretty native, even if you still retain, of course, your knowledge and your history of what you were used to do. The people we are working with today are basically working for us on a kind of part-time, almost outcome-based. And they are still active, often consulting people in their industry.
Right.
So I spoke to one of the guys today. He was on his way to a food factory in Barnsley today to do some training over the next few days on reliability engineering. So he spends most of his time on the shop floor with engineers and engineering managers and others to figure out how we improve the operation of that factory.
Right.
They spend maybe a day a week helping us build our company. So they bring not just the history of their expertise, but the current expertise. And of course, we also therefore can benefit from introductions into these environments where a lot of the manufacturers they work with are saying, what do you guys think about AI? What are we going to do? And they go, well, funny you should ask, because we're working with these guys at Ensemble. So it's also about act as a lead generation. So it's a kind of two different aspects to it. One is to bring that kind of deep vertical expertise into the business, and for us then to connect out with the right companies who might be interested in what we do.
Interesting. When you think about with the SaaS sell down, people always are thinking about the moats, the defensive, etc., whether it's sector or regulatory or hardware offering cited as something. It sounds like you're ticking a lot of the boxes there, because you've got a lot of reasons why it's very hard for someone to step in using agentic technology or using AI to code it, because it's very hard to build this thing, particularly there's a physical linkage with the system. With the system. It sounds like you're building something which is very hard to replace in that way, and arguably will replace other systems that are more traditional SaaS systems of record, etc. Yeah,
I mean, nothing is impossible to replace, right? And I think the term moat, I know it's a very popular term in the investment.
I'm not a fan of moat, but I'm interested in your views.
In the world of investors and investments, people love a good moat. I think it's very difficult to say our moat is X. I mean, some companies have it, right? But if you look at Google, it's their moat the search technology, which is the fact that 80% is a distribution, because you're a Google search on every mobile phone and everywhere, right? What's the moat really here? It's a combination of everything. It's brand recognition, distribution, it's the technology, etc., right? And the same thing is for us. If we were to build what some people call a moat, it's going to be because we've been around, we have built the trust of these organizations, that the software we provide is solid. Sometimes it comes down to people. Do they trust us as individuals to sell them this stuff? Which is, again, it's important to have these deep industry experts kind of on our side of the table. They can sit and talk kind of on our behalf, but in the language of the clients, right? All of these things will together add up to something of a moat. But then if the system just works, back to a point I made probably 20 minutes ago now around, enterprise have a lot on their plate. Making changes, there needs to be some real reasons for making a big change. And therefore, we think that if we deliver software that truly works, then just being that company that's in there, it's kind of a moat in its own right, I guess.
Makes sense. And maybe sort of zooming out completely to the potential futures that AI could bring, maybe start in the tech world and then kind of more broadly defined here, right? But I think as the future is really exciting time to be building a business like you're building today. How much do you think, if we look forward, not if, but when, with AI adoption now, that we say look forward 10 years, how much do you think the tech industry and the broader world will have changed with this technology?
I think less than people think.
Yeah, okay.
No, I mean, look, I think that some companies are going to be wildly successful and revenues are going to grow like crazy.
Yeah.
We will see a bunch of SaaS companies maybe die a slow death or get acquired, etc., and become somewhat outdated, but with a legacy revenue stream. I mean, we still have mainframe around, for God's sake, and we thought that was going to die 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So, change is hard, as lots of people said before me, lots and lots of people. And the same applies here, right? Okay. Sure, there will be some people who refuse change altogether, and they might struggle in their own industry, whatever industry they're in. So I'm not talking technology now, but if you're a retailer or a hospitality or logistics, etc., there will be certain platforms and technologies that maybe you do need to adopt, or you might struggle because your profit profile changes and so on. So there will be some almost forced adoption in some ways. But then, over time, things will absolutely change. And look, there's a lot of predictions of lawyers and accountants and others and software engineers, by the way, being out of a job in years to come. I think a lot of these industries will change tremendously. I mean, in software, it's already changing pretty quickly. Does it mean we need fewer people, or do we just write more software? Right?
Interesting.
The software become more pervasive because now we can do it. Before, it was prohibitively expensive to build some of these solutions that we now can build. So therefore, maybe we need more people. You still need people to go and speak to people about their requirements, right? So the whole agentic enterprise, I think, is far away. And, we are looking out over the city of London here. There'll be few boardrooms that are just going to sign up to, let's deploy some agents to run around in my business to look at all my secret confidential data and run my business. I mean, we are many, many years away from that before someone at the board level will sign that off, because they are ultimately responsible for the shareholders and others.
So that's all of those things create friction. The doom narrative really around mass unemployment for white collar jobs. You don't see that coming anytime soon. It's just a change in the job rather than a lack of job.
Look, when robots came around in the 70s and 80s, everyone in manufacturing was going to be out of a job. Yeah. And jobs shifted and moved to other places. And yes, there are parts of this country and other countries that have been affected by it, but it took a lot longer. I mean, there was more of a impact of moving everything, eastwards in terms of manufacturing than robots in the UK really came through. So these changes are changes. It happens all the time. But I think that kind of dramatic doom thing, I think... Personally, I think there's just, as always, too much friction in the system for that to even come through.
Yeah. And I guess it's very sector specific, right? There's, like you say, industrial is going to take a while to move, right? But maybe some of the more tech native stuff where the data is available and the system is more critical to it, that could move quicker and could drive change there. But again, you still need people again at the back end of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you're in the world of kind of marketing, advertising, and you're not using some of the AI tools to create either content, etc., you're going to fall behind, right? So those industries will change relatively dramatically, and that might require some people to find jobs in other sectors and so on. Accounting, you look at huge books, etc., that you want to close. Again, you probably need slightly few people there, but can it happen overnight? Can it happen over 1 or 2 years? Yeah, we shall see. I think it's going to take longer, which means that the whole machine of society will have a bit more time to change, let's say.
And you're an optimist or a pessimist around the sort of overall societal impact?
I'm always an optimist. Always an optimist. I think there are also opportunities around this that we didn't have before. We can do things better, whatever that is. But then, we live in a system that is a capitalist system that has companies and corporations that employ people and pay salaries and taxes and all of these things. And innovation is part of it. It has been since James Watt or wherever you go back to, to people 250 years ago and others who invented the various machines. I mean, this has been a cycle that is not going to end anywhere, near now or in the future. But then, as I said, I think tech innovation and the narrative around it doesn't always match adoption in the same way. So, I'm an optimist.
So on that really positive note, thank you for joining us for a really energizing conversation, and best of luck with Ensemble. It's a really cool business I think you're building there. So really enjoyed the conversation today. Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for the invitation. I've enjoyed the conversation and the view as well, of course. So thank you for having me. And thanks to you for joining us at Views from the Top, the podcast from Arma Partners. Look out for the next episode.